And it would be in this city that he would meet Shah Abdul Aziz, the son of the renewer of the faith. That's a typo, it should be renewer of the faith, Waliullah al-Dahlawi, who had lived before the time of Sayyid Ahmad Khan Bareilly. Imam Waliullah al-Dahlawi, rahimahullah, was a patron saint and mujaddid of his time period. At this time, the theology of undivided India was one theology. The creed was one creed. Their fiqh was one fiqh. Waliullah al-Dahlawi was famous for his revivifying the sciences of hadith in undivided India. Just before Waliullah al-Dahlawi's time, rahimahullah wa ardah, India was fiqh based, which is fine, but they had not been as heavily weighted in hadith. We remember this had happened to Yemen before Fath al-Bari was introduced to them. Imam ibn Hajar al-Asqalani is one of their ulama, but Fath al-Bari had to be introduced for them to go heavy into being hadith based. And now if you go there, it will seem as if they always knew about Fath al-Bari and they were hadith based. But a time was when they didn't. This is the same thing with Waliullah al-Dahlawi. He came back with sanads in the Sihah Sitta, the Muwatta, the Musnad, which is the hardest sanad to get. If somebody teaches the Musnad, they don't have sanad, that person is an imposter, because it's very difficult to get a sanad in the Musnad. It's very hard because the fuqaha that will test you will make sure that you've memorized all 30,000. And each one has several chains. And each one has a fiqh ruling that's connected with it. Sometimes you have a hadith that's narrated 3 different ways. And the different narrations have different fiqh rulings. So you have Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, who he's brought a hadith at one point and says, what do you say about this hadith? He says this hadith has 3 narrators, 3 forms of narration. If you use this narration, it has these consequences in fiqh. If you use this narration, it has these consequences. And if you use this narration, it has these consequences. So he gives you 4 different aqwal. Why? Based upon all of the different forms of that hadith will take. So it's very hard to get a sanad in the Musnad. There's only been 2 commentaries written on the Musnad. Only 2 commentaries. The best one written was most likely, if you judge between them, written by Imam Ahmad As-Sa'ati. His name will come up later. He is the father of Hassan al-Banna. And the 2 could not be more different. So Waliullah al-Dahlawi rahimahullah wa adra, he comes into India with all this ilm. Comes back into India after being in the Hijaz, and he imparts this knowledge. His sons, Shah Abdul Aziz and others, they go out on pilgrimage and they become slightly infected with the Muwahidun cult. They return to India with the infection, but missionaries from al-Muwahidun come to India. I will give you the year, the 1222AH Muwahidun missionaries. I'll give you the names as well. Sa'ad ibn Atiq, one of the missionaries of the cult. Students bringing books by Muhammad al-San'ani, the very reviver of the cult, bringing those books. Bringing the books of Muhammad Ali al-Shawkani, the former Zaydi Mu'tazila in his theology, convert to the Muwahidun. We'll mention and run across within the course of this lecture that many 12er Shia found Salaffiyah attractive because their theology is the same on so many points. Faith and deeds being part of salvation, the fact that everyone is their own absolute mujtahid and you don't do taqleed to others, and once someone dies, his ijtihad dies with him. This is what Imam al-Manini stated when shown the creed of al-Muwahidun. He said this is the very core and fruit of the 12er doctrine. And based upon merely this, we can dismiss those people. So Shah Abdul Aziz was infected. Sayyid Ahmad Khan Bareilly comes and studies from him. Sayyid Ahmad Khan claims that on the night of Laylatul Qadr, the 27th of Ramadan, he actually witnessed the entire creation bow down. He was then named by Shah Abdul Aziz and a number of people as Amirul Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. They crowned him a Khalifa based upon this advice that he gave them. They then gave him Bay'ah, the oath of allegiance, and he became their Amirul Mu'mineen. Now let me just flash back to Arabiya before I come back to Sayyid Ahmad Khan Bareilly, because it's significant that you understand both strands of the movement. Around this same time in Arabiya, the Al-Muwahidun cult gained entry to At-Ta'if, and with an army of thousands, they decimated the populace. They left only alive between 25 and 30 people in the city of Ta'if. They annihilated the population. People in Mecca had heard about this and were terrified that the same thing might happen to them. When they came to the gates of Mecca, Al-Muwahidun, they found that the Hajj was in season and that it would be better for them to come back after all the able-bodied men had left, because able-bodied men could challenge them, they could resist them, they could fight them. They wanted to come back when they would be in a situation of strength and have power over weaker opponents. They returned in the year 1218 AH in the month of Muharram and found the doors locked. They said they would murder everyone inside unless the gates were opened. Once allowed entry, they released absolute mayhem for 14 days. They used their time to destroy buildings, slaughter school teachers and scholars of all sorts, and forced people to renounce Orthodox Islam and come to the masjid to listen to the new teachings. People that refused were beaten and killed, and for the first time records were introduced to find out who was in congregation. So they kept records of people in their local masjid. Who was going where, who knows who, who's responsible for who. They kept records of them. Now Muslim armies came from the south, swept in, and fought to wrest the city from Al-Muwahidun hands. Heavy fighting continued in a seesaw match between the two groups and control of Mecca and other holy sites. The Brotherhood at one point stopped food reaching Medina, and the people starved to the point that they ate the dogs in the city. This is how hungry the people were. They starved the people out to where they ate the dogs of the city out of hunger and starvation. Medina was looted and devastated, and the grave of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was stripped of ornamentation, jewels, and other items. These were stolen, and the city remained in their hands until 1220 AH. Please be advised that Hajj was stopped between 1218 to 1220 AH. This has been mentioned and documented firstly by Jawdat Pasha in his Al-Ma'lumat Al-Nafi'ah, the Ottoman historian, who was an eyewitness. It was also documented by Sheikh Ahmed ibn Zaini Dahlan, the great Shafi'i scholar, in his book Khulasatul Kalam fi Bayan Umara al-Balad al-Haram, volume 2, and it is pages 3 all the way to 170, in which this was discussed in great detail about the number of invasions that Al-Muwahidun did, the number of murders, the number of rapes. We've even got population statistics for the number of cities that were depopulated. You might not have known this, but there were 100 villages, tented cities, and places that were totally depopulated. Could you imagine coming for Hajj and finding dead bodies in their ihram and a sea of red? Could you imagine going to the tented city of Mina and being killed while trying to go do the stonings because you wouldn't accept the creed? Well, this is precisely what happened, because people who were witness to it and fought Al-Muwahidun were there. Now, Muhammad Ali Pasha in 1220 AH took hold of the reins of the army and came to uproot the Brotherhood. But there's a few things I need to say about Muhammad Ali Pasha. When the Ottomans came in to power, the Ottomans ruled over their area. But the Mamalik, or the Mamluk of Egypt, continued to administrate their area because Egypt is Shafi'i. In the fiqh, they continued to administrate. But Muhammad Ali Pasha, who is a Hanafi from Albania. Green eyes, red beard. He wanted to bring about massive reforms in the way that the army was run there, the way that pensions were made, and the way that schooling was done. Because he believed that the schooling should be done the same way that it was done in Albania and other districts. The Mamluk disagreed with this because Hanafis are fiscal conservatives, they're social conservatives in their governing method. As I mentioned before, big, gigantic government, huge, gigantic military, and very small, tiny private sector. So remember, Muhammad Ali Pasha's thinking this when he's looking at the Shafi'is, which are what? Small government, tight cell of military, and what? Big private sector. So he's thinking, oh, subhanAllah, this is totally out of balance. We've got to get this organized. And there began to be battles between him and the Mamluk. He decimated the Mamluk. And at one point there was an attempt to reconfigure Al-Azhar's curriculum, and that's when there was incredible violence. And then he had to be brought to the table in negotiation because the remnants of the Mamluk and the populace in Egypt threatened to kill every Hanafi in the street that they saw. It's not good, but you have to understand the understanding that people had that this is our place, this is our fiqh, this is our understanding. We're simply not going to allow that. So there had to be a renegotiation. Muhammad Ali Pasha also believed that the Ottomans, as they were weakening, there was going to be a time in which there would be no Khilafah. And so he prepared people who were Waliul Amr. He prepared walis of different governing districts. And he was the wali and governorate of the Egypt district. There were no countries at this time. Egypt was not seen by the Ottomans and others as a country. It was a province or a governorate. There was no Egyptian nationalism. Most of the rulers in Egypt throughout all this time, Muhammad Ali Pasha, they weren't even Egyptians racially. They weren't Egyptians racially. Totally different. Nationalism came later. So he wants to make sure that that province is ruled in the absence if the Ottomans collapse, because the Ottomans were becoming the sick man of Europe. They were losing territories quickly. Every 15 years they lost a few territories. The Habsburgs were coming into their own. The Russian Empire was growing. And so Muhammad Ali Pasha had saw the writing on the wall. Now, after a lot of saber rattling from the Al-Muwahidun, the battle began and was swift. The movement began to be uprooted wherever it had placed its roots. Like unruly and stubborn weeds, they were pulled out by the roots and destroyed. The sons, grandsons, and missionaries of Ibn Abdul Wahhab's movement fled like hyenas from the Muslim army and hid away, blending in with the population and destroying buildings as they receded into their homeland. The ultimate end came for them when they reached Ad-Dir'iyah, the new paradise for the Brotherhood which they built, and it was destroyed by the Muslim army. They burned it to the ground and carried its theologians and warriors to Egypt and Istanbul to stand trial for murder, looting, rape, and numerous other charges. Many of them were beheaded and buried without funeral in unmarked graves, while others claimed to have repented, some of them being genuine. Now this is important. Saud ibn Abdul Aziz was executed quickly because he was identified as the leader of Salaffiyah. Saud ibn Abdul Aziz. He's executed. Other members of Salaffiyah, Sulaiman ibn Abdullah, one of the sons of Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, had over 1,000 bullets put in him to make sure that he was dead and to make him an example. The rest of the sons and grandsons of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab were brought to Egypt. Some of them claimed that they had repented. Abdul Rahman ibn Hassan, who was in Egypt, and others began to influence people. And their influence was later transmitted to a man by the name of Muhammad Hamid Fiqhi. And Muhammad Hamid Fiqhi transferred his influence later down the line to Sayyid Qutb.